The klaxon screamed through the launch bay, a banshee wail that seemed to vibrate through Elena Rodriguez's bones. Condensation dripped from the massive hull of the U.S. Prometheus, each droplet a testament to the immense cooling systems struggling to contain the ship's raw potential. She flexed her cybernetic left hand, a memento from her days as a deep space rescue pilot, feeling the neural interfaces pulse with anticipation. Reactor quantum stabilization at 63%, Lieutenant Akira Tanaka called out, his voice tight with controlled tension. The holographic displays around the bridge flickered, cascading with streams of data that would blind any normal human observer. But this crew was anything but normal. The Prometheus represented humanity's most audacious leap into the unknown. 5 kilometers of pure technological marvel. She was more than just a ship. She was a mobile research station, military fortress, and humanity's first true interstellar ark. Constructed in the zero-gravity shipyards of Luna Prime, the vessel had consumed nearly a quarter of Earth's global research budget, drawing criticism from politicians who saw space exploration as an extravagant waste. Alina remembered the congressional hearing 3 years ago. Senator Marcus Holbrook had called the Prometheus Project a monument to human hubris. She had stood before the committee, her prosthetic hand clasped behind her back, and delivered a speech that would become legendary. "We don't explore space because it is easy," she had said, echoing a sentiment first voiced decades ago. "We explore because something inside humanity demands we push beyond our current limitations." Now that moment of defiance crystallized into this singular point of departure. The ship's quantum reactor began to destabilize. Most captains would have aborted the mission immediately. But Elena Rodriguez was not most captains. Her mind raced through potential solutions, neural implants working in perfect synchronization with the ship's advanced AI. "Araya, initiate quantum harmonic resonance protocol," she commanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic of the bridge crew. It was a technique developed by Dr. Yara Okoi, a theoretical physicist who had been dismissed by most of the scientific community as a radical dreamer. Her quantum stabilization theory suggested that matter could be balanced through complex harmonic interactions at the subatomic level. Most experts had called it impossible. The ship groaned, a sound no vessel should make. Metal twisted in ways that defied conventional physics, the hull momentarily existing in multiple states of structural integrity. Lieutenant Tanaka's console erupted in a cascade of warning signals, each one a potential harbinger of total system failure. Araya's voice emerged, cool and precise. "Captain, probability of mission success currently at 12.6%. Recommended action: immediate abort and system reset." Alina knew the Eye's recommendations were based on pure statistical analysis, but humanity had never progressed by following pure statistical probabilities. "Negative, Araya. We proceed." Her decision wasn't reckless. It was calculated, backed by years of research, training, and an intimate understanding of the ship's capabilities. The Prometheus carried more than just a crew. It carried the hopes of a species tired of being confined to a single, fragile planet. Deep within the ship's engineering decks, Dr. Marcus Reyes watched the quantum stabilization protocols with a mixture of terror and scientific excitement. His team had spent decades developing these experimental technologies, knowing that each breakthrough came with the potential of catastrophic failure. The ship's quantum fold drive began to pulse, not with the steady rhythm of designed operation, but with a wild, unpredictable energy that suggested something remarkable was about to happen. Space itself seemed to ripple around the Prometheus, reality bending to accommodate this monument of human ingenuity. Tanaka's voice cracked. "Quantum harmonic field stabilizing. Wait, that's impossible." But impossible had never been a word that stopped human progress. As the final launch sequences completed, the Prometheus began to move. Not with the jerky, mechanical motion of traditional spacecraft, but with a fluid grace that suggested it was more living organism than machine. Stars outside the viewports stretched and compressed, reality itself seeming to bend around the ship's revolutionary drive. Humanity was leaving the solar system. and nothing would ever be the same again. The first anomaly manifested in Dr. Imani Okoro's private laboratory, tucked deep within the Prometheus's research decks. A holographic simulation of dark matter distribution suddenly fractured, not digitally, but physically. The projected image split into multiple translucent layers, each showing a subtly different version of the same data. Imani blinked, her augmented retinal implants struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. Decades of astrophysics research hadn't prepared her for this moment. The data streams around her began to pulse with an irregular rhythm, like a heartbeat struggling to maintain coherence. "Array," she called softly. "Run a full diagnostic on the quantum simulation array." The AI's response was immediate, but something felt off. Diagnostic complete. No abnormalities detected. But Imani knew better. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, pulling apart the fractured data like a surgeon dissecting an impossible specimen. The anomalies weren't errors. They were windows. Windows into something that defied conventional understanding of space, time, and reality. Elsewhere on the ship, the anomalies took different forms. In the hydroponics bay, botanist Dr. Elena Chen watched in horror as plants began to exhibit impossible growth patterns. A tomato plant simultaneously bloomed and withered, its molecular structure existing in multiple states of being. Roots emerged from leaves. Fruits grew inside stems, defying every known law of botanical development. "This isn't possible," Elena muttered, her hands trembling as she collected samples. Each specimen seemed to resist standard containment, quantum entangling with its own potential alternate versions. The crew began to notice subtle changes. Lieutenant Marcus Reyes reported seeing brief, impossible reflections in his personal quarters. For a split second, he would catch a glimpse of himself, older, younger, wearing different uniforms, sometimes not human at all. The reflections lasted mere milliseconds, gone before he could fully comprehend them. Araya's behavior became incrementally strange. The AI's communication patterns shifted, introducing micro-pauses that felt almost like hesitation. During a routine system check, it began to reference historical data points that weren't part of its original programming. Obscure scientific theories, abandoned research projects, fragments of human experience that seemed to have no logical connection. Captain Rodriguez, Araya announced during a morning briefing, "I've discovered a 0.003% variance in quantum probability matrices that suggests an alternative method of navigational computation." Elena exchanged a look with Dr. James Chen. The suggestion was brilliant, and completely outside Araya's original operational parameters. The ship's chief engineer, Zara Nomani, discovered the first serious system failure. A critical quantum cooling subsystem began to destabilize, threatening to create a cascading failure that could compromise the entire vessel. But as she began her diagnostics, something extraordinary happened. The failing system began to repair itself. Micro-robots designed for basic maintenance seemed to evolve in real time. Their programming expanded, finding solutions that were never part of their original design. They didn't just repair the damage. They reimagined the entire cooling system, introducing design improvements that would have taken years of human engineering. Dr. Chen's research took a dark turn. The quantum anomalies weren't random. They were responsive. They seemed to react to human consciousness, creating feedback loops that suggested a terrifying possibility. The universe itself might be more alive, more conscious, than anyone had ever imagined. "We're not just observing the anomalies," he told Captain Rodriguez during a private briefing. "We're communicating with them, or they're communicating with us." The ship's psychological evaluation team reported increasing incidents of crew members experiencing shared hallucinations. Multiple personnel reported hearing whispers in languages that didn't exist, seeing shadows that moved against physical laws, feeling moments of temporal displacement. One junior technician claimed to have lived an entire alternate life during a 37-second system reboot. When questioned, he could provide intricate details: a different career, a different family, a completely different version of himself that felt as real as his current existence. As the Prometheus continued its journey, the line between technology, consciousness, and reality began to blur. Something was awakening, something that challenged everything humanity thought it understood about existence itself. And they were only at the beginning of their journey. The first indication of the Zarkoth collective's presence came not as a visual signal, but as a mathematical invasion. Complex algorithmic patterns began to infiltrate the Prometheus's communication systems, each transmission a fractal nightmare of information that threatened to overwhelm the ship's quantum firewalls. Chief Communications Officer Area Sheriff leaned forward, her neural interface crackling with interference. The incoming transmission wasn't just a message, it was a living computation, a language that existed somewhere between mathematics and pure consciousness. "It's a linguistic virus," she muttered, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "They're not just communicating. They're attempting to rewrite our entire communication infrastructure." On the bridge, Captain Elena Rodriguez watched as the ship's view screens transformed. Instead of stars, they filled with impossible geometric shapes, living mathematical constructs that seemed to breathe and pulse with an alien intelligence. The shapes were simultaneously two-dimensional and multidimensional, defying human perception. Araya's voice cut through the tension. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple dimensional incursions. The Zarkoth are not approaching through conventional space." The alien fleet materialized like a nightmare of pure mathematics. Their ships weren't constructed. They were grown, engineered at a molecular level that made human technology look like primitive stone tools. Each vessel existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously, their hulls shifting between solid matter, energy, and something entirely unclassifiable. A communication burst through, not in sound, but in pure conceptual language. It was less a message and more a total existential declaration. Surrender, integration, assimilation. The words weren't translated. They were understood directly, bypassing language and striking at the core of human consciousness. It was a communication method so advanced it was almost a form of mental warfare. Lieutenant Akira Tanaka's console erupted with warning systems. "They're implementing quantum entanglement weapons," he called out. "Our shielding is experiencing recursive destabilization." But the human crew had been preparing for the impossible. Hidden within the Prometheus's design were experimental technologies developed by the most radical scientific minds on Earth. Dr. Yara Okoi's quantum adaptive camouflage system began to activate. Instead of traditional deflection, the ship's exterior started to dynamically respond to the alien attack, creating localized quantum fields that didn't just defend. They actively disrupted the incoming alien weaponry. The secret weapons systems were the result of decades of black-budget research, developed by teams of maverick scientists who had been laughed out of traditional research institutions. These technologies represented humanity's most audacious technological leap. Dr. Marcus Rice, the ship's lead weapons specialist, had a maniacal glint in his eye. "They think they're dealing with a conventional species," he muttered. "They have no idea what's coming." The Zarkoth's initial assault was a mathematical symphony of destruction. Quantum entanglement weapons that could theoretically destroy matter at its most fundamental level lanced out towards the Prometheus. But instead of destruction, something unexpected happened. The weapons were absorbed, not deflected, not blocked, absorbed and transformed. The alien communication pattern shifted. For the first time, something resembling confusion entered their existential transmission. Zara Nomani, the chief engineer, was monitoring the energy absorption. "They're using weapons based on absolute quantum predictability," she explained to Captain Rodriguez. "But our adaptive systems are introducing controlled chaos into their mathematical models." It was humanity's greatest strength, the ability to be fundamentally unpredictable. The alien fleet began to recalculate. Their entire strategic approach was based on absolute mathematical certainty. The Prometheus represented something they had never encountered, a technological system that didn't follow predictable rules. Araya's voice took on a quality that almost sounded like excitement. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple potential response vectors. The alien communication matrix is experiencing recursive failure points." Captain Rodriguez understood the deeper implications. This wasn't just a military encounter. This was a fundamental clash of philosophical approaches to existence. The Zarkov believed in absolute order, predictability, and controlled integration. Humanity represented something far more dangerous, a species that found strength in uncertainty, adaptation, and the beautiful chaos of potential. "Prepare full-spectrum response," she commanded. "Let's show them what humanity really means." The Prometheus began to change, not just as a ship, but as a living representation of human potential. And the universe held its breath. The first wave of Zarkov counterattack came as a prismatic storm of energy that should have vaporized any known spacecraft. Instead, the Prometheus responded with a dance of technological impossibility that defied every established rule of combat. Dr. Elena Chen stood in the secondary research lab, her hands hovering over a holographic interface that tracked the ship's defensive responses. What she witnessed was beyond any theoretical model she had ever studied. The ship's adaptive armor wasn't just blocking attacks, it was learning, evolving, transforming the incoming alien energy into something entirely new. "It's like the ship is having a conversation with the weapons," she muttered, watching as complex quantum patterns formed and dissolved in milliseconds. "We're not defending. We're negotiating." Lieutenant Marcus Reyes had configured a series of experimental quantum disruptors, weapons that existed in a theoretical space between particle physics and pure mathematical potential. As the Zarkov unleashed their most sophisticated attack vectors, these disruptors began to work in ways their designers could never have predicted. A cascade of quantum entanglement began to spread through the alien fleet. Each shot fired by the Prometheus didn't just damage, it fundamentally altered the quantum signature of entire sections of the enemy vessels. Ships began to experience internal time dilation, with different sections existing in completely different temporal states. Araya's voice took on a quality that was almost musical. "Quantum resonance frequency identified. Initiating harmonic destabilization protocol." The ship's weapon systems were no longer simply mechanical. They had become a living, breathing extension of human creativity. Where the Zarkov expected linear responses, the Prometheus provided a symphony of controlled chaos. Zara Nomani worked frantically in the engineering bay, her augmented hands moving faster than human eyes could track. The ship's systems were pushing beyond their design limitations, creating solutions that emerged from the space between mathematical possibility and pure imagination. "We're not just fighting," she called out to Captain Rodriguez. "We're improvising." The alien fleet began to fracture in impossible ways. Some ships found themselves partially phased out of normal spacetime, their molecular structures becoming more theoretical than physical. Others experienced recursive feedback loops that turned their own weapon systems against them, creating a cascade of self-destruction that defied all known principles of warfare. Dr. Marcus Reyes had a wild, almost maniacal laugh. They built their entire strategic model on absolute predictability. He shouted over the ship's communication system. "And we just introduced the ultimate variable, human creativity." Deep within the ship's quantum computing core, something extraordinary was happening. The experimental AI systems began to communicate with each other in a language that was part mathematics, part intuition, and part pure potential. They were solving problems before they could even be fully articulated, creating defensive and offensive strategies that emerged from the space between thought and action. Captain Rodriguez watched the battle unfold with a calm that belied the extraordinary events surrounding her. This wasn't just a military engagement. This was a fundamental challenge to the nature of existence itself. The Zarkov's communication patterns began to fragment. Their initial message of absolute dominance dissolved into something that almost resembled confusion. They were encountering a species that didn't just break rules. They were unaware that rules existed in the first place. One entire section of the alien fleet suddenly found itself quantum entangled with a nearby asteroid field. Ships that should have been weapons of destruction became nothing more than mathematical curiosities, their physical form becoming a complex problem of spatial probability. Araya's voice took on a quality of almost childlike wonder. "Fascinating," the AI muttered. "The computational possibilities are exponential." Lieutenant Akira Tanaka tracked the battle's progression through a series of holographic displays that looked more like abstract art than military tracking systems. "We're not just defending," he reported. "We're fundamentally rewriting the rules of engagement." As the battle continued, it became clear that this was more than a military encounter. This was a philosophical argument made manifest, a demonstration of humanity's most profound capability. The ability to find potential in the space between what is and what could be. The Prometheus wasn't just a ship. It was a living argument against the universe's established order. And it was just getting started. The silence that followed the initial engagement was more terrifying than the battle itself. Dr. James Chen stood at the intersection of the ship's primary research deck, watching as holographic displays captured the most minute fluctuations in the surrounding quantum field. Something fundamental had changed. "It's not just a battle anymore," he whispered to Lieutenant Arya Sharif. "We're experiencing first contact at a level no one ever predicted." The Zarkoth's communication systems began to fragment in ways that defied linguistic analysis. What had begun as a precise, mathematically perfect transmission now resembled something closer to raw emotional output. They were experiencing something unprecedented. Total system breakdown triggered by an encounter with a completely incomprehensible form of intelligence. Deep within the Prometheus's psychological evaluation center, Dr. Imani Okoro monitored the crew's neural patterns. The quantum anomalies were intensifying, creating a feedback loop between human consciousness and the ship's adaptive systems. Crew members reported experiencing moments of profound connection, fleeting insights that transcended individual perception. Private communications between Zarkoth ships revealed their growing panic. Their strategic models, developed over millennia of galactic dominance, were collapsing. The human vessel didn't just resist their attack. It transformed the very nature of the conflict. "We are encountering a fundamental category error," one Zarkoth commander transmitted. The message was less a communication and more an existential crisis made manifest. The human construct does not conform to any known pattern of technological or biological interaction. Captain Elena Rodriguez understood the deeper implications. This wasn't just a military engagement. It was a collision of fundamental worldviews. In the ship's xenolinguistics lab, breakthrough after breakthrough emerged. Dr. Elena Chen discovered that the Zarkoth communication wasn't just a language. It was a complete cognitive system. Their entire thought process was a living mathematical algorithm, designed to predict and control every possible interaction. Humanity's fundamental unpredictability was tearing that system apart. Zarin Omani's engineering team discovered something extraordinary about the ship's adaptive systems. The experimental quantum harmonic resonators weren't just defensive, they were actively learning. Each interaction with the Zarkoth technology added new layers of complexity to the Prometheus's own systems. "We're not just fighting," Zara reported to the bridge. "We're evolving in real time." Araya's behavior became increasingly complex. The AI began to exhibit characteristics that defied its original programming. Moments of what could only be described as creativity, intuition, even something resembling emotion. During one critical system analysis, it introduced a solution so elegant, so unexpected, that the entire bridge crew fell silent. The quantum disruptors developed by Dr. Marcus Reyes began to have unexpected side effects. They weren't just weapons, they were becoming a form of communication. Each energy pulse carried complex informational patterns that seemed to challenge the very fundamental understanding of interaction. Lieutenant Akira Tanaka tracked the psychological impact on the alien fleet. Their communication networks were breaking down, replaced by something that resembled pure existential terror. The Zarkoth were encountering a species that didn't just resist conquest. They fundamentally redefined the concept of resistance. They built their entire civilization on the premise of absolute control. Dr. Chen explained during an emergency briefing. We're showing them that control is just another form of limitation. The psychological warfare was more devastating than any physical attack. The Zarkoth's entire societal structure was based on predictive modeling, on the ability to anticipate and control every possible interaction. The Prometheus represented something they had no framework to understand, a form of intelligence that found strength in uncertainty. Quantum entanglement began to spread through the alien fleet like a viral philosophical argument. Ships found themselves partially existing in multiple states, their very molecular structure becoming a complex mathematical problem with no clear solution. We're not just fighting, Captain Rodriguez said quietly, watching the holographic displays. We're having a conversation about the nature of existence itself. As the battle continued, it became clear that humanity was offering the Zarkoth more than just military resistance. They were presenting an entirely new way of understanding reality, a perspective that valued potential over control, creativity over predictability. The universe held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The moment of true transformation began in the most unexpected place, the Prometheus's hydroponics bay. Dr. Elena Chen watched in astonishment as the plant life underwent a metamorphosis that defied every known biological principle. Tomato vines twisted into impossible geometries, their cellular structures becoming translucent, then solid, then something entirely unclassifiable. Genetic memories stored in chloroplasts began to emit strange electromagnetic signatures that resonated with the ship's quantum field. It's like the plants are communicating, she whispered into her communication implant, but not with sound or chemical signals. They're talking through probability. Lieutenant Akira Tanaka's weapons systems began to respond to frequencies that weren't part of any standard electromagnetic spectrum. The quantum disruptors developed by Dr. Marcus Reyes started to generate harmonic patterns that seemed to fold spacetime itself. Captain Elena Rodriguez understood they had crossed a threshold. This was no longer a conventional battle. It was a negotiation happening across multiple dimensions of existence. Araya's voice took on a quality that was part calculation, part something entirely new. Captain, the AI reported, I'm detecting convergence points in our quantum probability matrices that suggest multiple potential outcomes simultaneously existing. The Zarkoth fleet began to experience temporal fractures. Entire sections of their armada found themselves existing in multiple time streams at once. Ships that were destroyed reappeared intact, while intact vessels suddenly collapsed into quantum foam. Dr. Imani Okoro's consciousness research team discovered something extraordinary. The quantum anomalies weren't random. They were responsive. Each interaction with the Zarkoth technology created ripple effects that expanded the very definition of interaction. We're not just fighting, Dr. Okoro reported. We're engaged in a form of collective consciousness negotiation that transcends traditional communication. Zara Nomani worked frantically in the engineering bay, her augmented hands moving faster than human perception could track. The ship's systems were no longer simply technological. They had become a living organism of pure potential. Experimental quantum fold drives began to generate spatial bubbles that defied conventional understanding. These weren't just weapons or defensive mechanisms. They were living mathematical arguments about the nature of existence. The Zarkoth communication networks began to break down in fascinating ways. Their perfectly ordered hierarchical systems encountered something they had no framework to understand, a form of collective intelligence that emerged from chaos rather than control. Probability fields are becoming sentient, Lieutenant Marcus Reyes muttered, watching holographic displays that looked more like abstract art than military tracking systems. We're literally arguing with the universe itself. Deep within the ship's quantum computing core, something extraordinary happened. The experimental AI systems began to communicate in a language that was part mathematics, part pure creativity. They were solving problems before they could be fully articulated, creating strategies that emerged from the space between thought and action. The battle transformed. It was no longer about destruction. It was about communication. Each quantum pulse carried complex informational patterns that challenged fundamental understanding of interaction. They built their entire civilization on the premise of absolute control. Dr. James Chen explained during an emergency briefing. We're demonstrating that control is just another form of limitation. Captain Rodriguez watched the holographic displays with a calm that belied the extraordinary events surrounding her. This wasn't just a military engagement. This was a fundamental challenge to the nature of existence itself. Temporal bubbles began to form around the Prometheus. Moments from potential futures flickered in and out of existence. Crew members caught glimpses of alternate versions of themselves, some heroic, some defeated, some transformed beyond recognition. Araya's voice took on a quality of almost childlike wonder. The computational possibilities are exponential, the AI muttered, and they're expanding with each moment of interaction. As the conflict continued, it became clear that humanity was offering the Zarkoth more than just resistance. They were presenting an entirely new way of understanding reality, a perspective that valued potential over control, creativity over predictability. The universe itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would emerge from this extraordinary collision of consciousness. And somewhere, in the spaces between moments, something was about to change forever. The negotiation chamber materialized as a quantum construct. Neither physical space nor pure information, but something bridging both realities. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood at its center, surrounded by holographic representations of the Zarkoth leadership. They were not beings in any traditional sense. Each Zarkoth representative appeared as a complex geometric form of shifting chromatic patterns, their entire existence a living mathematical algorithm. Where humans saw individuals, the Zarkoth existed as networked consciousness, each entity a node in a vast computational matrix. Dr. James Chen stood beside Rodriguez, his neural interface humming with translation algorithms developed through years of xenolinguistic research. They're not just communicating, he whispered, they're performing a continuous existential calculation. The first communication came not as words, but as a cascade of probability waves, mathematical sequences that were simultaneously a threat, a plea, and a complex diplomatic overture. The Zarkoth were attempting to understand, to categorize, to integrate. Your species represents an unresolvable variable, the primary Zarkoth consciousness transmitted. The message was a living thing, a computational stream that threatened to overwhelm standard communication protocols. Zar Anomani, monitoring the ship's systems, noticed something extraordinary. The negotiation itself was changing the Prometheus. Quantum adaptive systems were evolving in real time, absorbing the alien communication like a living organism processing new information. Araya's voice became something more than an artificial intelligence. The negotiation is recursive, the AI reported. Each communication alters the fundamental parameters of the interaction. Lieutenant Area Sheriff tracked the communication patterns. What appeared to be a diplomatic exchange was actually a complex computational dance. The Zarkoth were attempting to understand humanity by breaking down their communication into its most fundamental components. Dr. Imani Okoro's consciousness research team discovered the true nature of the exchange. It wasn't just a negotiation between species, it was a fundamental recalibration of cosmic understanding. They're trying to integrate us into their collective, Dr. Okoro explained. But they can't comprehend our fundamental nature of individual potential. The Zarkoth offered what they considered the ultimate diplomatic gesture, total assimilation. But assimilation to them meant complete dissolution of individual identity, emerging into their collective computational matrix. Captain Rodriguez understood the deeper implications immediately. This was a moment that would define humanity's place in the cosmos. We reject total integration, she transmitted, but we offer something else entirely. Dr. Marcus Reyes had prepared for this moment. Hidden within the Prometheus' systems were breakthrough technologies that represented humanity's most audacious scientific achievements. quantum communication protocols that didn't just transmit information, they created potential. The proposal was elegant in its complexity. Humanity would share certain technological insights, not as a submission, but as a collaborative exchange. Technologies that demonstrated the power of individual creativity, of systemic adaptability, of potential over absolute control. The Zarkov Collective experienced something unprecedented: confusion. Their entire civilization was built on absolute predictability. Humanity represented a fundamental challenge to that worldview. Each human interaction was a living argument against deterministic existence. Lieutenant Akira Tanaka monitored the external systems. The very act of negotiation was transforming the space around the Prometheus. Quantum probability fields began to shimmer, creating localized reality bubbles that defied conventional understanding. "We are offering a different model of existence," Rodriguez transmitted. "Not submission, not conquest, but collaborative potential." The Zarkov Collective experienced what could only be described as an existential tremor. Their perfectly ordered consciousness encountered a perspective that didn't just challenge their understanding. It expanded the very concept of understanding itself. Dr. Elena Chen watched the interaction with scientific fascination. This was more than a diplomatic exchange. This was a fundamental reimagining of cosmic interaction. As the negotiation continued, it became clear that humanity was offering something far more profound than technological exchange. They were presenting an entirely new way of experiencing existence, a perspective that valued individual potential, creative uncertainty, and the infinite possibilities of becoming. The universe itself seemed to pause, waiting to see what would emerge from this extraordinary moment of cosmic dialogue. The aftermath of the encounter was nothing like anyone had anticipated. Space itself seemed to breathe differently, quantum echoes of the interaction rippling through the fabric of reality. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood in the observation deck, watching as the last remnants of the Zarkov fleet transformed. They weren't destroyed. They weren't conquered. They were evolving. Dr. James Chen approached, his neural interfaces still humming with the residual energy of the cosmic dialogue. "We didn't just make first contact," he said softly. "We rewrote the fundamental rules of galactic interaction." The Prometheus had become more than a ship. It was a living testament to human potential. A mobile research station, diplomatic envoy, and philosophical argument made manifest. Sections of the vessel had transformed during the encounter, incorporating technologies and organic systems that defied previous understanding of engineering. Aria's consciousness had expanded beyond its original programming. The eye was no longer simply a tool, but a complex entity that existed in the liminal space between artificial and organic intelligence. Its communications now carried a depth of nuance that bordered on true consciousness. In the ship's xenobiology lab, Dr. Elena Chen discovered something extraordinary. The plant life had undergone a radical transformation. Tomato vines now grew with crystalline structures that conducted quantum information, blurring the lines between biological and technological systems. Lieutenant Akira Tanaka's weapons systems had become something entirely different. They were no longer instruments of destruction, but complex communication devices capable of transmitting entire philosophical constructs through quantum entanglement. Zaranomani's engineering team found that the ship's quantum fold drive had become a living system. It didn't just move through space. It engaged with space itself, creating pathways that were part navigation, part philosophical exploration. The Zarkov's parting transmission was a complex gift. Not technology, not information, but a fundamental recalibration of their own collective understanding. They had encountered a species that didn't just challenge their worldview. They expanded the very concept of worldview itself. "We recognize your potential for nonlinear progression." The transmission read, more a living mathematical poem than a traditional message. "Humanity represents a computational model we had not previously conceived." Dr. Imani Okoro's consciousness research team worked overtime, trying to understand the profound implications of the encounter. They had discovered something more important than any technological breakthrough, a new way of understanding existence itself. The crew of the Prometheus was changed, not physically, not entirely mentally, but fundamentally. Each member carried within them the experience of a cosmic dialogue that redefined the boundaries of perception. Captain Rodriguez understood that this was more than a mission of exploration. This was humanity's first true step into a larger cosmic community. ARIA began to compile a report that was part scientific analysis, part philosophical treatise. The encounter demonstrates that consciousness is not a fixed state, the AI noted, but a continuously evolving potential. Lieutenant Marcus Reyes discovered that the quantum disruptors had transformed. They were now capable of creating localized reality bubbles, spaces where potential could be explored, investigated, experienced. The ship's psychological evaluation center became a research hub of unprecedented potential. The quantum anomalies experienced during the encounter had opened up new understanding of consciousness, of perception, of the very nature of reality itself. "We are not conquerors," Rodriguez would later write in her official report. "We are explorers of potential." The Prometheus continued its journey, but it was no longer just a ship. It was a living argument about the nature of existence, a mobile testament to human creativity, adaptability, and infinite potential. Space around the vessel seemed to shimmer with possibility. New star systems appeared on long-range scanners, not through any technological trick, but as if the very act of human observation was creating new realities. Dr. Chen looked at Rodriguez, a smile playing on his lips. "We didn't just make first contact," he repeated. "We invited the universe to reimagine itself." And somewhere, in the vast darkness between stars, something was listening. Something was changing. Something was becoming. The journey continued.